The space age is often thought of as a 20th century miracle. The Saturn V, Apollo 11, rockets that carried humanity to the moon. But the fundamental principles behind those rockets, the blueprints that made spaceflight possible, were actually drawn in the year 1550, 400 years before Neil Armstrong took his first step. His name was Conrad Haas, and in 1961, the same year Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, a forgotten manuscript was discovered in the archives of Sibiu, Romania. Inside were detailed technical drawings of multi-stage rockets, aerodynamic stabilization systems, and liquid fuel experiments. Technology that wouldn't be reinvented until the mid-20th century. This is the story of Renaissance rocketry, a true relic of the space age, hidden for 4 centuries. The year is 1550. The Renaissance was entering its later phase. 3 decades had passed since Leonardo da Vinci's death, leaving behind revolutionary designs for flying machines and war engines. The masters of the High Renaissance had laid the groundwork. Now, a new generation of engineers was building on that foundation, quietly revolutionizing warfare and technology. Conrad Haas was one of them. Born around 1509, likely in the Austrian territories, Haas became an arsenal master for the Austrian Empire. He worked at the Imperial Armory in Vienna and later in Hermannstadt, modern-day Sibiu in Transylvania. His job was to oversee the production and testing of weapons, cannons, explosives, and critically, early rockets. Between 1529 and 1569, he compiled a manuscript, 450 pages of meticulous technical drawings, calculations, and observations. Written in German, it documented decades of experiments with gunpowder propulsion, projectile design, and aerodynamics. This wasn't speculative philosophy, it was a technical manual, a blueprint for machines that would not exist for another 400 years. The manuscript remained forgotten in the Sibiu archives until 1961, when historian Doru Todorishu rediscovered it. The timing was extraordinary. That same year, the world watched as humanity first left the planet, and buried in a Transylvanian library was proof that someone had tried to reach the sky centuries earlier. The most groundbreaking idea in Haas's manuscript is the theory of motion of multi-stage rockets. A rocket works by expelling mass in one direction to push itself in the opposite direction, but as fuel burns, the rocket gets lighter. The problem is, you're still carrying the empty fuel tanks and the structure that held them. Haas solved this. He designed rockets that fit inside one another. As the first stage exhausted its fuel, it would separate and fall away. The second stage would ignite, now lighter and faster, and if there was a third stage, the process repeated. This is exactly how modern rockets work. As each stage exhausts its fuel, it separates and falls away, allowing the remaining stages to continue with less mass to carry. This principle, staging, is fundamental to all modern orbital launch systems. Without it, reaching space would require impossibly large amounts of fuel. Haas also experimented with liquid propellants. In his manuscript, he describes mixing substances like ammonia compounds and acidic liquids to create more controlled combustion. These were rudimentary tests, but they preceded Robert Goddard's first successful liquid-fueled rocket launch in 1926 by nearly 400 years. Haas understood that rockets needed stabilization. His solution was delta wings, triangular fins attached to the rocket's body. These were aerodynamic stabilizers that kept the rocket oriented vertically during ascent. But here's where the story takes a turn. Conrad Haas could have changed history. His designs worked. His engineering was accurate. If his rockets had been built and deployed, the Austrian Empire could have possessed weapons centuries ahead of their enemies. Warfare would have been transformed. But Haas didn't want that. In his manuscript, he wrote a striking passage. Translated from the original German, it says, But my advice is for more peace and no war, leaving the weapons in storage. So the bullet is not fired, the gunpowder is not burned or wet, so the prince keeps his money. The arsenal master, his life. This was a moral objection. Haas had built the future, and he chose to suppress it. Why? Perhaps he saw the devastation gunpowder weapons were already causing. Haas worked in an arsenal. He knew what cannons did to human bodies and what explosives did to cities. So, the manuscript stayed in the archive. Haas continued his work quietly, but he did not publish. He did not seek fame or funding. He did not push for his designs to be built. The rockets lived only as drawings, preserved but unbuilt. This raises a fascinating question. How much of human technological progress is delayed not by lack of knowledge, but by deliberate suppression? How many Conrad Haases have existed, scientists and engineers who understood something dangerous, something world-changing, and chose silence? The answer remains unknown. But Haas's manuscript survived. And in 1961, when the world was finally ready to reach the stars, his work was rediscovered. 400 years later, the world was ready to listen. Today, Haas's manuscript is preserved in the state archives of Sibiu. It remains a testament to human curiosity and the desire to reach beyond our limits. And it reminds us of something essential. The future isn't always ahead of us. Sometimes it's buried in the past, waiting to be rediscovered.